Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. My name is Jemmy. I'm 41, and I've been driving trucks for the majority of my adult life. I don't talk about it much, and I definitely don't share this story very often, but it's been weighing on me for years, and if I don't tell it aloud, I think I'll lose my mind. It began with a haul out of Lincoln, which was just a routine job transporting VUC units to Salt Lake. Nothing out of the ordinary. I was operating alone in my own rig. I had to drive overnight to keep to my schedule, but it works, and that's what counts. The drive was smooth for the first few hours, with no traffic, and I hardly saw another set of headlights. Once I reached the Wyoming stretch of I-80, which I had driven more times than I could count, I knew where the exits were, which ones had fuel, and which ones had coffee that wouldn't make you hate your life. It was probably around 1 a.m. I only noticed mile marker 313, because I had seen that number the week before on the same route and thought it sounded like the number of a hotel room or apartment. It stuck with me for no apparent reason, but this time, as I passed it, I felt a strange tightness in my chest, not a heart problem, but a feeling that something wasn't right. You know how you walk into a room and know right away that something's wrong even when the CB made a sound. I thought maybe I needed to eat something, because I hadn't eaten anything but gas station peanuts and energy drinks since lunch. No one was around to talk, but it cracked and hissed like someone was trying to say something. So I leaned over, thinking it was just static, but it was barely audible underneath. It was a woman's voice, possibly muffled and wet sounding. "Did you see her?" That's all I heard. I picked up the microphone and repeated it, but nothing came. I tried switching channels to get someone to stop talking, but all I heard was the hum of tires and the gentle moan of my engine. Then, up ahead, I noticed a woman wearing a long white dress. She was maybe 30 feet off the edge of the lane, walking slowly and steadily without hitchhiking, flailing, or yelling for help. What caught my attention was that she didn't appear cold. She had no shoes, no coat, and didn't react to my headlights. It seemed as though she didn't even realize I was there. I turned on the air horn at full blast, and she didn't even turn. I eased the truck a little left to give her space without going over the line. I passed her, and she continued to walk as if I didn't exist. I checked my side mirror, but there was no sign of her, no shadow, no hint of white fabric. And I've seen some crazy things on the road, like people intoxicated, animals running between lanes, and a guy who once set up a lawn chair in the median and simply waved at cars. This chilled me in a way that I couldn't understand, but I didn't stop trying to explain it away. Perhaps she was having hallucinations, or perhaps I slept for a moment and dreamed it. I kept reaching for an explanation, but nothing stuck. An hour later, I pulled off at a rest stop. It was one of those small pull-offs with no services or vending machines, just a broken picnic table and a buzzing floodlight above a depressing little patch of gravel. I got off to stretch and smoke, and as I did, I noticed footprints on the side step that were slightly damp, as if someone had been there while I was driving. I stared at them for however long I couldn't remember. Burned down in my hand, so I opened the passenger door too quickly and slammed it against the trailer's side. I checked the cab and found no one in the sleeper or under the bunk, just the smell of a stale, wet, earthy smell that didn't belong in my rig. I locked everything and got back on the road, but something happened that I still don't understand. About 20 minutes later, I passed mile marker 313 once more. I hadn't turned around, and the GPS indicated that I was still traveling west, but the number and location were the same, as well as the strange sensation that my stomach was contracting. 100 yards ahead, the same woman, wearing the same white dress, was walking, but this time she looked up and grinned, but it wasn't a typical smile. It was too far, and her mouth was open. I drove right through her, not stopping or blinking, as if she was trying to fit the expression on a face that wasn't made for it. I braced myself for impact, but there was none, just a violent blast of cold air like opening a freezer in a pitch-black room. My breath clouded the cabin. My hand slipped slightly on the wheel from the sudden moisture. And then it was over, the fog. I didn't stop until the sky turned grey with morning. I pulled into a truck stop with real lights, people, and noise. I parked and just sat there, engine off, door locked, hands still on the wheel if I was afraid to let go. I made the delivery that day and loaded normally, didn't say anything to the customer or the dispatcher, just nodded, signed, and a week later, when I returned to the Nebraska parking lot, I was cleaning the cab when I pulled up the passenger side seat and noticed a piece of white cloth stuck down near the hinge. It was still wet and covered in blood, but I couldn't identify as dark rust. I told dispatch that I wasn't doing overnights anymore, and that I was only doing short daytime routes. I've never been back on that section of I-80 since. When people ask me why I switched routes and quit long haul, I tell them it was the schedule that was stressing out my back, and they nod, which makes story to make sense. I'm 36 years old and have been long haul driving for about 15 years. The majority of nights are just asphalt, white lines, bad coffee, and radio static. You stop thinking about the strange little things you see outside and dismiss them as peculiarities of the road. However, there was one night in 2020 when I was hauling steel from Salt Lake City to Phoenix. It was a fairly routine trip, and the dispatcher advised me to avoid the Flagstaff Pass because there had been, and I chose to take the longer route through eastern Arizona along Highway 101 because of the early snowstorm that shut it down the night before. If you've ever driven it, you know it's completely deserted, with no lights or gas for miles, just a few red rock formations, and a two-lane highway that stretches so far that it feels like you're driving on a ribbon that unspools into nothing. It was probably just after midnight when the exhaustion hit, and it wasn't the typical kind of exhaustion that you shake off with a monster or by rolling down the window. Different. My arms felt heavy, my eyelids felt like sandbags, and I kept missing mile markers as I drifted across the line and jerked back to center. I set the brake, killed the engine, leaned the seat back, wrapped my flannel shirt around my eyes to block out the glow from the dash, and I don't think I was even asleep when I heard the knocking. It wasn't a marked turnout, just a small space to get the cab off the road far enough not to get clipped. It was a sharp tap sound beneath the cab, like fingernails or bone on metal. It wasn't rhythmic like a ticking engine cooling down. Instead, it sounded deliberate. It froze, remained motionless, and I immediately tried to reason that it was probably a raccoon or a loose bracket settling, but the timing was too sporadic, as if it were waiting between taps. Wanted me to know it was there, so I slowly removed the flannel from my eyes and looked in the mirrors, but all I saw was black desert. At night, the desert absorbs light like a sponge, so even with a full moon, you can't see much past the shoulder. I used my flashlight to reach out the window and angle it down to get a glimpse of the area underneath the truck, but all I saw was dust and shadows. The knocking stopped, and I sat back, heart thumping a little faster than I wanted to admit, and when I turned the ignition, the radio began to make this terrible screeching sound in the cab. It wasn't static or even feedback, but rather the sound of metal being torn in half, like long, high-pitched nails on glass, sort of screaming. I rushed to turn it off, grabbed the knob, and twisted to hard, breaking it off in my hand. The silence fell like a hammer, and he was standing behind me. Something was wrong with her. Her limbs hung too loosely, as if her joints weren't working, and her mouth was open, as if she was screaming, but no sound was coming out of her arms. The trailer was about 20 feet back in the middle of the dirt road I'd pulled off on, and she appeared to be a woman in her mid-30s, with long, black hair and tangled skin that suggested she might have been Navajo, were limp at her sides, with the exception of her right hand, which kept twitching as if it were stuck in a loop. I didn't move, and I doubt that I even breathed, because my entire body was urging me to remain motionless, not react, not blink, and not stare too long. My instinct told me, she knows you see her. She's waiting for something, and when I blinked, she was gone. I quickly fled the cab, walked around the trailer with a flashlight, and called out, "Hey, you okay?" When I stepped back toward the cab, I heard something hit the ground near my foot, a faint clink, and realized it was a tooth, a molar human who had turned yellow, but still had the root. I froze, trembling slightly in my hands, searching the dirt for movement, and then I noticed something duck under the trailer. There was no response, no movement, just the hum of the wind and the ticking of the engine as it called. Faster track clearly. I squatted and pointed the light beneath the rig. Nothing moved, but there were dozens or more handprints in the dust beneath the truck. Some were small, like children's hands, and some were smeared, like something had been crawling and dragging itself under the trailer, while others were just pressed flat into the dirt on the tires, gas tank, and undercarriage. A few were even higher up, like someone had been climbing up the side. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors, and removed the crowbar. Around 2 a.m., I began to hear whispering, but it wasn't coming from inside the cab. Rather, it seemed to be coming from outside the truck circling it. I don't speak Navajo, but I grew up in Gallup, so I just sat there with no lights or radio, just gripping cold metal eyes flicking between the mirrors. I heard enough of it to recognize the sound it was chanting, low rhythmic continuous, not speech. 4 hours, I sat there listening, not moving, not blinking, and not speaking. By the time the sky lightened and the whispering stopped, I felt like I had aged 10 years. My legs were numb, and my hands were stiff from gripping the crowbar. I climbed out at dawn and checked everything, and there were no handprints, not even smudges. The ground appeared unaltered in the dust, and the tooth was gone. I wasted no time in starting the car and driving, not stopping to stretch or eat. I arrived in Phoenix early in the afternoon, and I don't think I ever clenched my jaw once. That evening, I called an old co-worker named Martin, who used to run freight through that area in the past. I told him what had happened, and when I reached the part about the woman in the tooth, he ceased talking, and then he said, "You saw her. What do you mean by her?" He mentioned that she occasionally appears when you stop by herself on those old roads, looking like a woman, but she isn't once she sees you. I haven't gone that way again, and I hardly ever stop on tribal land, not even for 5 minutes, and I hardly ever drive at night unless I'm in a convoy or close to a truck stop. Story 3. I've been driving trucks for 23 years and counting, longer than some dispatchers. I don't scare easily. I've hauled loads through ice storms, slept through tornado warnings, and even had a guy try to jack me at a rest area once. I've seen a lot of strange things out there, but nothing like what I saw off Highway 56 about a year ago. I was running alone, hauling feed corn out of Wichita Falls and heading west toward the Gallup route. I've run this route 100 times, mostly on back roads with few towns in between, which is okay with me because I like the solitude. That night, I remember everything being normal, maybe even normal, with no strange feelings or warning signs. I just passed through a small stop called Medford and was planning to pull over in about an hour, and I wasn't rushing or behind schedule. Too difficult, just another leg of the trip. I had been driving for about 5 hours when I noticed a sign for a rest area. It was faded green, as if someone had taken a shotgun to it, and the letters were half gone, but I could make out an arrow pointing off the highway and a rest stop. The problem is that I had never seen that sign before, and I knew the road. I had logged it on GPS routes, old logs, you name it, but I was exhausted and couldn't sleep at the moment. I turned off the rest area, which was hardly more than a slab of cracked pavement, lined with dead mosquitoes and broken fencing, with no lights, no other cars, no vending machines, and no trash cans. I was ready to park the rig and call it a night, but I hesitated because something felt off, and I couldn't quite place it. I had a strange feeling in my chest, like a low-pressure drop. Like when I almost continued when I entered a room and felt like someone was talking about you, but I stopped myself because I was overanalyzing the situation. I told myself that it was just an old stop one that I had never seen before, possibly decommissioned or temporarily in use, and that I would sleep, get back on the road, and be in a gallop by mid-morning. I parked, killed the engine, got into the sleeper, cracked the window slightly for air, locked both doors, and then I lay back and was out within minutes of sleep. Didn't last long because I woke up maybe an hour later with no noise, just a sudden, acute awareness that something was wrong. When I opened my eyes, I realized that there was no sound, no wind, no insects, no engine ticking, and that the entire world was artificially silent, as if it had been put on mute. Then the smell hit me, thick and wet and rotten like meat. I was left in a hot car for too long, which caused me to gag. I sat up quickly, bumping my head against the ceiling. My heart was already pounding before I even reached for the flashlight. I turned it on and leaned forward toward the windshield, where the beam sliced through the cab and out across the lot. That's when I noticed it, a person standing on the road near my truck, in the center of the blacktop, just standing there. There was no movement, no lights, and no initial reason for being there. I thought maybe they broke down or their car had gone off the road, so I clicked the key in the ignition and nothing happened. I tried again, but it didn't work. I'm obsessed with pre-checks, and the battery was brand new 6 days prior. I tried a third time, but this time it didn't work. I turned the flashlight back toward the road, and the figure was still waiting in the same spot and posture. I backed away from it as I stared, trying to make out more details. It was very tall. Its arms hung too low past where its knees should be, and its posture didn't seem natural. It wasn't hunched, but its neck was tilted bent sideways like it had been popped out of place, and its head twitched slightly like it was adjusting to the light. I turned off the flashlight and sat in the dark for 10 or 15 minutes, listening and breathing shallowly, waiting for it to move. When I looked again, it was gone, so I turned the flashlight back on and swept the beam across the lot, but nothing happened. Then the tap came down the passenger side window, and I didn't turn right away. Instead, I just froze in that kind of fear. When I finally looked, I saw a face upside down pressed against the glass. It had climbed onto the roof, and its mouth was so wide open that it appeared as though its jaw had come loose, leaving only a black, wet hole. Its skin was stretched to tight over its skull, and it was slick with something thick, possibly blood or oil, but I couldn't tell. Its eyes were the worst part, white as I backed slowly toward the sleeper, keeping my eyes on it, and then suddenly it dropped out of sight, without any sound or thump on the hood, just gone. I stayed up the rest of the night with my flashlight pointed at the windshield. They were carved out of chalk, and they bulged, with no lids, no movement, just these pale orbs staring straight through the glass. I started the truck, and at first, the engine purred like a cat. I didn't eat. I didn't check the tires. I just drove, and I didn't stop until I hit Gallup that night. I had a wrench in my lap, sweating through my clothes, and at some point I passed out. When I woke up, it was light out, and everything appeared to be normal, a desert stretch with empty highways and distant birds, as if nothing had happened. Truck stop, lots of lights, people moving around. It felt safe until I got into the sleeper, pulled the curtain, and noticed a long, wet handprint smeared across the outside of the passenger side window. I cleaned them off without telling anyone, but a few weeks later, When I was filling up in El Paso, another driver was talking to me while the pumps clicked, and I mentioned Highway 56 in passing to him, telling him I'd taken, and he looked to me and remarked, "You pulled off there," as his face turned pale at a strange old rest area west of Medford. I nodded. He didn't ask what happened, just said, "You witnessed it." Then he left without saying goodbye or finishing his coffee. I no longer travel that route. Instead, I reroute through Amarillo, which adds roughly 2 hours, depending on traffic. I don't care. I don't care. It knew me. It climbed up there on purpose. It wanted in, but it didn't get story for me. My name is Ray, and I had been in the trucking business for 21 years, which is a lot. I stop at rest areas that I don't recognize. I don't break my window. I don't disregard my instincts, and I don't sleep as easily as I used to. The highway plays tricks on your eyes, causing your brain to zone out for extended periods of time. Eventually, you stop noticing most of the strange things out there. However, this wasn't a trick or a blur in my mirror. This was the only time in my career that something so horrifying that I completely changed the way I worked and stopped going 4-night runs. I had a trailer full of electrical transformers traveling from Idaho Falls to Cheyenne, and it was easy enough that I had run that route so many times that I didn't even need to check my GPS. I remember stopping at this dilapidated gas station just before the Wyoming border. It had one of those old displays that click over the numbers as if it were 1989. I swiped my card, but nothing happened, and the pump reset once more. Odd, but not unexpectedly. When I went inside to pay, the cashier, a wiry kid with a faded neck tattoo, saw my expression and replied, "Yeah, it does that when the ghost messes with it," with a straight face. I grinned and remarked, "Nice one," and gave him money. He simply shrugged as though he wasn't kidding. So I didn't press it and put it back in the cab and rolled out that stretch of road. Heading southeast into Wyoming is quiet at night, not eerie, just normal for that area, but as soon as I crossed the state line, something started to feel strange, and I can't figure out why. It wasn't the truck or the road, but rather the feeling that something was following me, just out of sight. I passed a few empty rest stops with no lights on, and 4 miles I didn't see another rig. And the highway, then I noticed the headlights, just off the road, tucked away between a row of slender pines. I told myself that the lights were too high and too far apart to be a car or a truck that had pulled off for the night. But they were pointing in the wrong direction, not toward the road, not as an angle for re-entry rather than directly across the road. As I passed the spot, the lights disappeared, not dimmed, not flickered, just gone. No cab, no tail lights, no sound, nothing behind the trees. I checked my mirrors, but there was no sign of a car, no glint of metal, no movement at all, just empty snow and still trees. I slowed down and leaned forward, thinking that the nagging feeling in my gut was back. 10 minutes later, I saw the same lights, the same height, the same distance from the road, the same angle, and I swear to you, they were exactly the same, as if someone had copied and pasted them. I was frightened and slowed almost to a stop, cracking the window to listen to the cold air hit me, but I didn't care. The equipment might have been an odd angle, or perhaps the headlights of a truck coming off an access road, and I had just missed the turn. I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it into the trees, because there was nothing moving, no wind, and no traffic. My hands were a little unsteady, and I detested driving in blizzards. I've had near misses with moose jackknife people once in 2011, but this time it was different. The lights blinked out, and I sat there for a second, flashlight that was still pointed. Heart pounding in my ears, I told myself that was the best explanation I could think of and continued driving. A few miles later, I came upon a turnout gravel patch that appeared to have once been a way station or some sort of snowplow staging area. There were no lights or signs, just a wide, level parking area. I parked, backed the trailer against a snowbank, and turned everything off. There was no quiet, loaded, and I got into the sleeper cab, left my boots on, and lay down. Near midnight, I heard footsteps as clear as day crunching in the snow. One step buzzed another, and I held my breath. There's a sound people make when they walk on snow when it's cold enough, not the soft kind, but the brittle kind, crunchy sharp. This was followed by silence, then more steps closer, and now I didn't move the footsteps. They had a flashlight within arm's reach and weren't sleeping, just wondering what if it wasn't headlights. I walked around the truck in a deliberate, slow pace, as if someone was inspecting it, and then I heard a dragging sound, like metal scraping against metal, coming from the back of the trailer and continuing toward the cab. I reached up and turned on the flashlight, but I didn't move until the scrape stopped, so I threw myself forward into the driver's seat and turned on the high beams. The lot was completely empty, but I could see footprints there, no shoes, and I didn't check the trailer, didn't walk around the lot. I started the truck, locked the doors, and drove off hard without even looking in the rearview mirror until I was 20 miles down the road. They circled the truck one clean path all the way around, but they didn't leave, and they stopped right under my door. I froze, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I didn't trust that opening the door wouldn't bring whatever it was inside. The sun came up around Rollins, but I didn't eat, pee, or even blink. It felt like light, not relief. At the first way station outside of town, I pulled in with trembling hands and told the on-duty officer that I thought someone had tried to break into my truck. He asked where I was, and I replied, mile marker 232. That stretch lacks a 232. Jump from 231 to 233, he scowled. Been that way since the last reroute. I told him about the lights, the footprints, and the sound of dragging metal, and he remained silent for a moment before looking at my logbook and giving it back. You should drive during the day, he said, unsmiling and without humor. Later, I pulled up the GPS log, and everything was there except for a 5-minute window during which there was no ping, no data, and it seemed like the truck had stopped for a while. I've never gone back through that portion at night, and I've had offers. Even though I'm a mechanic now, I used to drive trucks full-time in 2009. It wasn't the ideal job, but it paid more than repairing broken tailpipes and worn-out transmissions. I used to make long trips across the southern states, from Texas to most of the time. Arkansas knew the routes by heart, but on some nights, it felt like the road knew me. In October of that year, I picked up a solo run from Amarillo to Little Rock, because I had promised my sister that I would be home for her birthday for dinner and her awful lopsided carrot cake. Normally, I didn't do overnights alone because my co-driver Nate had quit the week before. Stated that he wanted a vacation, specifically saying, I can't do nights anymore. He didn't explain, but I could tell something had shaken him during our last run. He kept glancing in the side mirrors like he was waiting to see someone riding our bumper. I asked him about it once. He just said, you'll see. Additionally, it began normally enough. I left Amarillo in the late afternoon, clear skies, light traffic, stopped at a Lowe's, grabbed coffee, and ate a hot dog that tasted vaguely like plastic. I wasn't in a rush, but I figured if I made decent time, I'd hit the Arkansas border before midnight. I was about an hour into Oklahoma, somewhere past Eric. I laughed in that tight, not really funny way. Everyone has their ghosts. It was approximately 8:45 p.m. when I first saw him. I recall looking at the dash because the display was flickering, most likely due to a loose wire, but I hadn't had time to fix it when my headlight swept across the roadside, and there he was, standing on the shoulder facing forward as if he had been planted there without attempting to flag me. I slowed down a little, but not much, just because I had a gut feeling that I should keep an eye on him. He was wearing a long brown coat that was heavy looking, like one of those old wool coats you see in detective movies, with a thick collar that was soaked at the hem. He didn't move or blink, and the strangest thing was that my lights didn't catch his face, not like it was hidden, more like the shadows just clung to it. I've passed plenty of. I radioed it in a possible pedestrian, near mile marker 197. But there was no vehicle in sight. The dispatcher said she would notify the state patrol, so I continued driving, telling myself it was just some drifter, possibly intoxicated, possibly lost. 10 minutes later, I saw him again, in the same coat, in the same stance, but this time, I turned off the radio because the static had started hissing between songs, and it was getting on my nerves. I know how tricks of light work, and I know that the road can mess with your head after hours behind the wheel, but that stretch is straight with no exits or curves, and there is no way to cross without my seeing. Even if he had crossed the divider, on foot, there would have been no way for him to get that far ahead. Strangely, the silence felt safer if I stayed. 40 minutes later, I pulled into a rest stop I had used before. It had nothing special, just the vending machines, a bathroom, and a depressing little payphone that never worked. Another truck was parked way in the back of the lot. It had no lights, no sound, and no movement, as if the driver was already asleep. I parked under the one flickering lamp and went to the restroom. I wasn't tired, but I needed to reset, and I splashed water on my face. I walked to the sink, leaned forward, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like hell's skin, with pale eyes and red veins, and I didn't feel exhausted or drained like I'd been running on empty all day. The lights buzzed and dimmed just enough when I stepped inside, but I told myself it wasn't anything, it was just old wiring I'd seen worse. I turned on the tap cold when I heard heavy, slow bootsteps coming down the tile hallway behind me. I immediately thought, another driver, maybe the guy from the other truck. Water let it run for a moment, then leaned down and splashed my face, and that's when the lights went out completely. There was no flicker, just black. I froze, water dripping from my fingers, unable to see my reflection. I screamed out, "Occupied man," but there was no answer. The steps continued to come steadily, deliberately, and without hesitation, slowly, closing in, and suddenly they stopped exactly outside the door. I don't know why, but I just stood there transfixed, my fingers starting to tingle, and my ears starting to ring. I stared at the spot where the mirror had been barely breathing, and then the lights came back on a few seconds later. The hallway was empty, so I didn't wait to question it. I left quickly, with my keys in hand. The vending machine stopped, and I checked the bathroom. When I got to my cab, I opened the door and stopped cold, and there was a damp brown wool coat on the passenger seat. I kept that seat empty. It's always easier to sleep when everything is in its proper place and the cab is cleaner and less cluttered. But now that the same coat was sitting there as it should have been, I leaned closer and noticed that it smelled like mold and stale smoke, that old, musty smell from a basement that no one goes into anymore, and the seat was warm as if someone had just been sitting there. I closed the door firmly enough to make the rig rock climb in, started the engine, and didn't stop until I crossed into. I didn't go inside. Instead, I parked under the lights, locked the doors, and kept the engine running. I sat there until the sky began to lighten, never leaving the mirrors, never even closing my eyes. And that was the last time I took that route. When I got back, I told dispatch I wouldn't run. Arkansas. The moment I saw that Waffle House sign glowing by the interstate, I pulled off. I checked the seat again, found no coat, no smell, and the fabric was cold to the touch. I believe Nate knew something, but he didn't know how to express it. Since then, I've driven a lot of miles and witnessed my fair share of odd things, but that night still haunts me. Occasionally, when I pull into a rest area, I still think about those footsteps, the silence, and the passenger seat still gives me chills. Story 6. My name is Darren, and I've been driving a rig since I was 24. Long-haul trucking isn't the most glamorous job, but it made ends meet and kept me moving both physically and emotionally. I enjoyed the road, the space, and the way the engine's rhythm kept me away from people, which I didn't mind. Normally, silence is comforting, but this particular night it changed everything I recall. It began with a job offer that seemed almost too good. At around 1000 p.m, my dispatcher Carl called and said he had a last-minute run that I could pick up that same night. He said it was a straight shot from outside Ridgeon, Wyoming, up to a drop just below the Montana line, with no layovers or touch freight. Just pick up, drive, drop and done, refer load. 11:45 p.m, don't open the trailer. Just get it to the destination without asking any questions. That last part made me think, come on, Cowell, what am I hauling, black market snowman? He didn't laugh, but I've dealt with high security loads before, like pharmaceuticals, electronics, and the like, but this time there was a different tone in his voice, and I could hear something cold and final, but I still said, yes, money. The pickup was just off a 2-lane road in the suburbs, with no warehouse or office, just an empty lot, and a single refrigerated trailer hooked up and ready to go. The only light was from a street lamp flickering, as if it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or not. I parked, stepped outside, and gave the unit a once-over because I was tight, behind on everything, and had no credit cards for rent truck maintenance. My pre-trip inspection revealed that the trailer's refrigeration was humming louder than usual, and the lock on the back was an odd large digital keypad without a military-style logo, keyhole, or padlock, just a code panel made of thick steel. The tires were hitched tight, there were no strange smells, and there was no leak. But when I touched the side of the trailer, my hand jerked back, and it was hot, not warm, like there was something running inside it 4 hours, which isn't how reefer units operate. It's cold outside, especially at full blast, but I got into the taxi and told myself it was okay. I pulled onto the highway shortly after midnight, and for the first hour or two, nothing happened. I drank coffee from a gas station thermos, watched the miles pass under my tires, and even began to relax a little. This was all before midnight. But then the temperature dropped strangely, and I noticed that my fingers were getting stiff, and that my breath was fogging up in front of me. I reached to check the vents and the heater was on high, but it felt like the air had gone cold, and was leaking in from the floor, doors, and windshield. I looked at the dashboard, and it read 15D, which wasn't right because it had been in the 40s earlier. I heard it thump heavily, sharply, and something shifting in. I checked the trailer's side mirrors, and everything appeared to be in order, but the noise didn't sit right. Reefer cargo is strapped down and packed to stay put, so that kind of noise doesn't happen unless something is loose or alive. I turned off the radio and leaned forward, and after a lengthy scrape, I pulled into a turnout close to an old way station, which appeared to have been abandoned 4 years. The engine slid out of the cab, and the air outside struck me like a wall. I walked around the rig with my flashlight in hand, breathing heavily, when I heard it let me out. The voice was faintly muffled, but real, and I froze in place. I pointed the flashlight at the trailer door, but nothing moved, no rattling, no banging, just silence. Then, dab, dab, dab right against the metal, I staggered back. It felt colder than any cold I had ever experienced before. I called before I could stop myself, because my chest was pounding and the voice was tired and resigned, as if whoever was inside already knew how this ended. I didn't even think about it, so I ran back to the cab, slammed the door, locked it, and just sat there shaking. Then, 3 knocks came right behind my head, and I jammed the rig. I put the car in drive and sped back onto the highway, pushing the speed well beyond what was safe for a loaded truck. I didn't care, I just wanted to get out of there, but the cold followed, and frost began to form inside the windshield. The steering wheel felt like stone under my fingers, and the smell of rotting meat and wet earth hit next. It was thick, heavy, and wrong. I gagged and rolled down the window, but it didn't help. Then I looked in the mirror and saw a face pressed against the trailer's side window, which was white and empty. When I looked again, the face was gone, I drove for another hour until I came to a truck stop near the town of Colston, which was far from the lights. I got out and walked around the trailer again, hand on my phone, ready to call the police, when I noticed it like a slow, steady smear running down from the top seam of the trailer, thick red reel. I touched it. They were staring at me with eyes that didn't blink. I lost it, swerved off the road tires screaming, and nearly flipped the entire rig. I backed up and staggered into the diner, without realizing it was warm. I passed a couple rough-looking guys at a corner booth and went to the bathroom without saying anything. I locked the door and scrubbed my hands until they were numb. When I returned, the rig was gone, not moved, not driven off, no sound, no tail lights, no skid marks, just a dark, empty patch of concrete where it had been. I hurried to the counter and asked the cashier if she saw anything. She gave me a quick glance before asking, "You have pines that are hollow." They went under almost 10 years ago when one of their trucks vanished in a snowstorm near Glacier Pass. They never found the load, so she took out an old yellowed newspaper from under the counter, which displayed a picture of a rig half buried in snow. My trailer had the same number and logo, and everything that one was carrying unclaimed flood. I nodded slowly, and she shook her head. Victims from Idaho who were supposed to be sent for forensic analysis never showed up, but some claim it still appears when the temperature drops. I left my number with her and stayed 3 nights in the motel next door in the hopes that the truck wouldn't return, but it did on the first night at 3:12 a.m., knocking directly behind the headboard of my motel bed. I sat up and held my breath. "So please just let me go now, no matter where I go. It happens not every night, but enough that when I wake up, the mirror will be fogged, and even though the room is warm, I will smell something sour and sweet dead. Occasionally, for a brief moment, I will see that face. In the mirror, I quit trucking after selling my rig and getting a job at a warehouse. I'm Mike, 42, and I've been a long-haul truck driver since I was 21. That's more than 20 years on the road. Just me, my rig, and a map that might as well be tattooed on the back of my hand by now. I don't have children. I've never gotten married, and I once dated a woman named Carla in Idaho, but it's boring to be across town stacking boxes and scanning inventory. I'm finished with story 7, though she didn't enjoy the silence in between calls. I suppose I've always thrived on distance rather than proximity. Trucking allowed me freedom, without office politics or alarm clocks, just the steady rhythm of tires on pavement, a thermos of coffee from the gas station, and the assurance that no one was watching me. Throughout the years I've spent transporting goods across this country, I believed I'd seen everything there was to see, until that one job that still keeps me up at night. I recall that it was a Tuesday when I received a call because I had just finished. Ben's dispatcher called me at around 6 o'clock to let me know that he had a late pickup from a private contractor with a sealed crate that needed to get to a drop point just outside of Dallas. He didn't seem excited about it, which was unusual coming from Ben, who usually pitched jobs like a car salesman who doubles as a radio host. But this one is different. He said you don't have to take it, but they're paying. I was looking forward to a leisurely dinner and an early night's sleep. When I asked him what the cargo was, he hesitated and wrote down experimental equipment, no company name, just coordinates. I said, "You're cool now. A sealed load with ambiguous paperwork usually makes you uneasy, but triple pay was low after a dry month, so I assumed it was dubious in a way because the government didn't want to discuss military contracts and secret tech that I had previously hauled for them without any issues. Said yes by 9 o'clock. The coordinates took me to a fenced compound about 40 miles east of Winslow. The area appeared to be dead flat buildings with low roofs surrounded by dry scrub. There was no company logo, no floodlights, and nothing welcoming other than a gate that rolled open. As I got closer, I noticed a man waiting outside who was tall, lanky, and pale like a piece of paper. He was wearing a black uniform that was tight around the collar, but he had no name. I backed the trailer in, but I didn't see what they loaded. I just heard a heavy thud, followed by the trailer doors slamming shut. No forklifts, no beeping, no footsteps like someone had dropped a coffin-sized secret inside my trailer. He didn't say anything, just handed me a clipboard and gestured toward the loading dock. If I had interrupted his day, I signed the manifest, but there were no delivery instructions or contact details. I thought it was a software glitch, but in the back of my mind, a tiny irritated knot began to form. The first few hours were smooth music playing low, window cracked, typical desert emptiness, and then the GPS froze screen. Grey route wiped clean, and I stopped and rebooted it. Just do not open during transit stamped 3 times across the page in red ink. However, things changed after 2:30 a.m. I noticed it when the silence began to descend. You get used to the sound of the wind buffeting the cab, the tires humming, and the ambient whoosh that becomes your background music, but all of a sudden, the kind of silence where your breathing sounds too loud, the kind that makes your ears hurt, disappeared. I thought it was a person standing in the middle of the road, but when I turned off the radio and leaned forward, I saw the shape. It didn't move low down or hit the horn, and it wasn't looking at me, but the head was tilted almost like it was listening, and the limbs didn't hang straight. The arms were too long, and it looked like someone had attempted to construct a person using the wrong blueprints. I realized that it wasn't standing naturally, rather, it was suspended, with the feet hovering an inch above the pavement. Then, like a malfunctioning projection, it vanished, and I slammed the brakes, sat there, breathing heavily, checked the mirrors, and looked around, but it was empty. I told myself that I was exhausted, and that perhaps there was a remnant image burned into my retinas. The CB then kicked in white noise, and my breathing became abnormal, breathing heavily, slowly, and wheezily, as if someone was dying on the other end of the line. So I grabbed the microphone. Breaker 19. This is Midnight Runner. Do you copy, or are you breathing? There was silence, followed by 3 loud bangs, from the trailer. Not road bumps, not shifting weight, so I pulled off to the shoulder and killed the engine. I exited the vehicle with the flashlight and walked to the back, where there were long streaks and 4-fingered handprints on the trailer, smudged down the metal from the roof. No human could have climbed up there because they were too high and too wide. I opened the trailer doors, and the crate was still there, with a large steel box bolted shut, but the smell was so strong that I couldn't breathe. I quickly closed the doors and took a step back, at which point I noticed the prints in the gravel, not boot prints, long and narrow. My feet were almost reptilian, with claw marks where my toes should have been. I locked all the doors and then heard whispers inside the cab, and they made me gasp for air. I spun around, but nothing happened, so I punched the dashboard, started the engine, and drove back onto the road at 90 degrees, not caring about state troopers or weight restrictions. The whispering didn't stop immediately. It faded gradually, as if whatever it was had to be dragged back. The cab was freezing, and I could see my breath fogging up with each exhale. When I arrived at the drop-off location shortly after sunrise, I was trembling. It was another fenced facility outside of Dallas with the same setup, no names and no markings. A man in a hazmat suit met me at the gate, said nothing, and simply signed off on the delivery. As I turned to leave, he said, "If anything follows you, it won't leave this area." I stared at him, wondering what the hell was going on. He looked at me through the face shield, and I didn't argue. Worth checked into a motel and left the engine running all night. I haven't taken another sealed haul because I won't touch anything until I have all the manifest details, and I haven't driven west of Albuquerque in over 8 years. I'm 45 years old, a truck driver since I was 23, and I'm not much of a talker, but if you have a few minutes, I'll tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago that I still don't fully understand. Since the bugs hadn't yet begun to smear the windshield, I recall running alone from Kansas City to a small plant near Lafayette. It was normal freight steel coils and heavy stuff, nothing unusual, and I had run the route before with good timing and smooth haul. It was late, probably close to midnight, when I began to feel that deep kind of tiredness that creeps up on you. I didn't want to push through it behind your eyes. You learn not to do that in this line of work. So, I looked up an old way station a few miles ahead and discovered that it had been closed 4 years. But the lot was still there. It was a large, open area that appeared to be quiet, so I pulled in and parked toward the back near the tree line. There were no other trucks or lights except mine, so I left the engine running for warmth. I must have been in the sleeper for no more than 10 minutes when I felt the bump. It wasn't the same as a jolt from the trailer settling or a wind gust. Rather, it felt like someone had pushed the back end of the trailer with her shoulder, softly, but clearly enough to wake me up without immediately frightening me. I sat up, held my breath, and waited until I heard a slow dragging sound, like metal on metal, that makes your stomach turn, since it shouldn't have been there. It was moving slowly and purposefully along the passenger side of the trailer, as if someone had been running a crowbar along it. I exited the bunk, took my flashlight from the dash, cracked the door open, and looked around, but all I could see was the lot, the outline of the trees, and the typical nighttime shapes. I stepped out, boots hitting gravel, and walked around to the other side, where the trailer was undamaged and showed no dents or scratches. They started from the tree line, went straight up to the trailer, and then veered back toward the woods. There were no tire tracks or other signs of a person, just these enormous prints in the gravel, and I thought I followed them for only a few steps while shining the flashlight between the trees. The footprints were too big to be normal, and they looked like children's shoes. A part of me thought it might be some kind of messed up prank, possibly some backwoods guy playing around to scare off truckers. But what I saw didn't look like a prank. About 20 yards in, close to the edge of my flashlight beam, I saw a tall figure standing motionless, completely still, with no shirt on, just a pair of torn jeans that looked soaked from the knees down. It could have been mud or something else, but I didn't care to check. His skin appeared pale, somewhat greyish, as if he hadn't been exposed to the sun for years. The thing that struck me the most was how quiet it was still, with no bugs or wind. Just this guy, or whatever it was, staring at me from between the trees. He stood there with his head tilted to the side, eyes wide, and locked onto me, as if he already knew what I would do next. Then he smiled, but it was a smile that was too big, as if his face was stretched incorrectly, with only his lips showing, and no teeth. I turned around and walked quickly, but steadily back to the cab, locked the doors, started the engine, and drove. I didn't even check my side mirrors. I just kept my eyes on the road and got back on the highway as if my life depended on it. I think I drove about 10 miles before I looked up at the rearview mirror and noticed the same kind of footprints, only this time they were on top of the trailer. I nearly jackknifed the entire rig when I slammed the brakes hard and pulled off into a rest area with a working street light, one of those orange glow ones that always make everything look worse. I climbed out with a flashlight in one hand and a tire thumper in the other, but my hands were shaking enough that I had to slow down as I ascended the ladder to the trailer's roof. There was no one up there, just dust and a chilly wind, but at the edge of the dust was one word. Keep in mind that the letters weren't scrolled. Instead, they were meticulous, as if someone had taken their time with them. I got down, didn't even turn around, got into a taxi, and drove straight to Lafayette without any stops, breaks, or back roads for the drop. I took a few weeks off, telling dispatch that I had the flu and couldn't sleep for more than a few hours at a time. When I did wake up, I was certain that something was outside the window. But I never saw it again after that. Instead, I always chose truck stops with lights and people, even if it meant paying. However, occasionally, when I'm parked overnight and nothing happens, I'll feel that gentle bump again, the one that wakes you up just enough to question whether it was story 9. Actually, I'd been driving long-haul trucks for the majority of my adult life. It's not glamorous, but it's reliable, and I enjoy the solitude. There's something reassuring about the rhythm of it being just me, my rig, and the open road most of the time. However, occasionally something eludes normalcy, and this incident that happened to me doesn't fit into any category. 3 winters ago, I was in the middle of a cross-country haul, carrying frozen poultry and refrigerated goods. I believe I had travelled that section of I-80 more times than I could count somewhere west of Nebraska, and to be honest, it's not one of the more exciting routes. It's mostly flat land, small towns, and long stretches of empty road. You'd think I'd have it committed to memory by now. However, that night I was running behind schedule and got delayed in Ohio due to some warehouse issues, so I was pushing later than usual. I had passed the town of Bellwood at about 11:15 and was planning to drive for another hour or so before stopping. I don't like to drive while sleepy, but I thought I might have a little more left in me. Then the fatigue struck hard, and it wasn't just the typical road fatigue. It was heavy, like something hit a switch in my body. My arms felt lead, my eyelids felt like bricks, and I was having problems keeping the truck centered in the lane. Then, as if it was waiting for me, a sign for a rest area appeared 2 miles plain blue. I put on my turn signal, took the exit, and pulled into the lot. The first thing I noticed was how dead the place looked. No cars, no semis, just me, and the lot had cracks in it that looked like it hadn't been maintained in a long time. The street light above the lot flickered in and out, casting long jumpy shadows, and the building in the middle looked like a bunker with grey concrete walls. The highway sign was simple and said, "I need sleep." I would have slept on a pile of gravel at that point, but I was so tired that I pulled into a spot near the back, turned off the engine, got into the sleeper, and stretched out. I thought I would wake up in maybe 20 or 30 minutes, but instead I woke up in a chill that shouldn't have been there. Boarded up windows and a few broken vending machines were visible through a dirty glass panel near the entrance. It was so cold that I could see my breath, and I sat up quickly, bewildered. Even with the engine off, it takes hours for the sleeper cab to lose heat like that. I reached for my phone, but it was dead, and I swore I had left it charging. Then, I pulled back the curtain to look out the windshield, and I saw dozens of people standing in front of the truck. I thought it must have been a dream, a lingering image from something I'd seen before going to sleep. But then one of them stepped forward, a tall man, perhaps wearing something long. They were just standing there facing the cab, no movement, no sounds, men, women, and a couple of children. At least that's how their shapes looked. Their faces were hidden in shadow, or perhaps I just couldn't focus on them. No lights, no phones, just dark outlines, like a coat or cloak. He approached my door slowly, unhurriedly, almost casually, as if this was something he did every night. Panic struck, so I jumped forward, locked the doors, and got into the driver's seat. I turned on the headlights, and they vanished. No running, no walking, and I sat there in silence, clutching the steering wheel, my heart thumping so fiercely that I thought it might shatter something inside of me. But I didn't try to explain. I didn't ask any questions. I just tried to start the engine so I could get the hell out of there. But the rig wouldn't turn over, and the battery was completely dead. Everything had been fine before I parked, so I was stuck by myself without a phone, an engine, or heat. I put on my coat, got my flashlight, and went outside. But as soon as I hit the ground, the cold hit me like a wall. I then went around to check under the hood, more out of habit than want. And that's when I noticed the tracks all over the truck. There are no tire tracks from any other vehicles around it, leaving strong impressions in the frozen slush. Car with only these human-like footsteps entering or exiting the lot had appeared on the sidewalk and was waiting. I carefully moved away, got back in the taxi, and closed it up once more. Remained there, keeping the spotlight on, not sleeping, and without blinking, pointed at the windshield, observing the hours of waiting that must have gone by, but that the sky never brightened, and it remained black with no daylight or assistance, just me, and that frozen. There's no other explanation for why I must have blacked out again, because when I opened my eyes, everything was my phone was back to life and charging as if nothing had occurred. The cab was warm, and the engine was running. Nearly 7 in the morning. I checked the time. I checked outside and saw no damage or footsteps. The snow surrounding the truck was new and undisturbed, so I stepped out and strolled about the area without seeing anyone had visited, even though the building appeared different now, cleaner and brighter. However, something inside of me told me no as I moved closer it, so I got back in the truck and left after checking my GPS log, which revealed nothing. I contacted a friend who used to work dispatch and stopped at a rest area there. When I inquired about the exit in that area, he informed me that it had been closed 4 years, destroyed entirely following some infrastructure improvements. I checked, and there shouldn't have been a rest area there. There are only trees and shoulders, no roads, no signs, and nothing else on satellite maps. Didn't exist, and the dash cam film from that evening showed only static when I grabbed the portion that covered the time I stopped. I've had a 4-hour period of non-stop visual cacophony on I-80. I've seen that sign a dozen times since day and night, but I've never discovered the exit. It seems as though I was there only once, waiting for me to be sufficiently exhausted to notice it. I don't pause in between milestones. 238 and 240 are no longer relevant, regardless of how exhausted I am. I've been driving for a long time, and I'll keep going until I pass it.